If you're feeling frazzled about images in Affinity, you're not alone. We got images, we got picture frames, we got pixel layers, sometimes even raw layers, convert to image resource, rasterize, linking, embedding. What is all that stuff, and does it really even matter to my project? I just want to get going. Truth is, it does matter, so let's dig into it. We'll be dealing with three really simple elements: what Affinity means by an image, what it means by a picture frame, and how pixels or pixel layers are different from those. And after that, we'll throw in the awesome raw file as a bonus. But first, we really should take a quick trip to Document Setup here to check a couple of settings that relate directly to image clarity and quality, namely under Color and Resources. Let's start with Color Format. RGB8 is a good option for anything headed to a screen, to a device, a phone, a tablet, a computer. If you're having trouble with banding in your images, you might want to switch to RGB16 to give you the extra bit depth from 8 to 16 to see if those graduations might be a little smoother. A good pair under color profile for RGB would be either Adobe RGB or Display P3 if you're confident enough to target higher end devices like today's smartphones. Adobe RGB is slightly more baseline, probably a little safer for older devices. The images are going to look really similar in either case. If, however, you are headed for a print job, you really want to set for CMYK to begin with, and then under color profile, choose the option that your provider suggests. They'll know which one of these is best to use. A good baseline option might be web-coded if you don't know which one to use otherwise. Under Resources, we've got a major idea here. Do I prefer embedded images or linked images? Embedded images simply means that your files are going to stay inside your Affinity file. That means your image files are literally going to get embedded into the Affinity file. And for small projects, 1 page, 2 pages, not too many images, that's perfectly fine. However, if you're doing something bigger, like a book or a magazine or something with lots of pictures in it, it would be a much better idea to go with preferred linked. That just means that your files are going to stay outside of your Affinity file, and then they just need to travel with your project. So keep those images in one big folder somewhere. Don't move them around. Don't change the file names. Just keep them there, and Affinity will stay happy with that. A much better idea on a big multi-image project. Affinity works hard to observe a non-destructive workflow. That means that it leaves your images in their original condition, their original state, without messing with them at all. And usually that's the best practice. Sometimes though, what if a person's got a blemish on their skin that you need to correct? You're going to have to change pixels. And that's called destructive work. And don't let the name freak you out too badly. You do it for good reasons, and you'll still get good results. But destructive and non-destructive are terms you'll definitely run into. To get started at the most basic level with a basic image, we'll go to the File menu and down to Place, Control-Shift-M on Windows and Command-Shift-M in the Mac. Brings open the Open window. You can drag these files out into your document. You can double-click them. You can single-click and just hit Open. You get the same result with any of those techniques. The image cursor will load up, and you can click and drag to scale that image to the exact size you want. Now, don't forget, this is non-destructive. So just by way of nerding out a little bit, if we pop up to Document and run down to Resource Manager, make sure that image is selected, you can see some details here. We're not going to be able to change any of those things in this current state because it's non-destructive. That's actually a good thing. It's going to leave the image in its original condition. That's good. But that doesn't mean we can't do at least some basic things. For example, I guess we could scale it, continue to scale it. If we roll up close to the corners, we can rotate. Some basic moves there. But even more than that, select the image and let's pop over to the Layers panel. And right here we have filters. These are live filters. You can do any of these things to this image in a dynamic and virtual way. Won't change the original pixels, but it will change the way they look on the screen and the way they export when you make a PDF or export a JPEG or package this up in any way. For example, I could go down to Vignette And let's crank the exposure just a bit. Let's pull it the other way. Get some vignette around the edges there. It's a common thing to do to photograph. Maybe you like that effect, maybe you don't, but you can see that we've added that effect. And if we toggle this little guy here open, you can see that's in its own layer, and we can toggle that on and off because it was a virtual change. Also, we can select that image and use the next little menu over, which is adjustment layers. And we can add any of these things that we like. I'm a big fan of curves, so let's add a curve here. Curves are a really powerful way to affect exposure on a tone by tone basis in your image. So let's say we want to deepen the shadows and brighten the highlights a little bit. We can bring some drama by adding a simple curve there. Close that, and now we have a curves adjustment layer. I'll drag that down onto my image layer to make sure it applies only to that image. You can see I can toggle that open and closed, and I can toggle that on and off. So there are some virtual changes you can make even while leaving the image in its non-destructive state. And the difference between an image and a picture frame is pretty simple. It's the difference between this and this plus one of these. You take the image, you put it inside the frame, you get to size it, scale it, move it around, and get it positioned exactly where you want it. And so the value of a picture frame is that you can resize and crop inside that picture frame. So how do we go about doing that? You might think immediately, oh, there's a crop tool. I'll just use the crop tool and crop that image. But notice if you do this with the crop tool, you're cropping the entire document, the entire canvas, not just your photograph. Not exactly what we want. So let's hit escape there and not do that. In fact, let's just tap V to go back to our basic move tool. We'll select the image, and instead we'll use right click and use convert to picture frame, or shift P for, I guess, shift your picture. And that changes the visual metaphor slightly, and it gives us some new controls that allow us to do more complicated things. Like, let's say I want to crop out this firefighter here. Let's go over like that, and now he's gone. And I can use the control hub there in the center to completely reframe that. I could resize the entire image if I wanted to this way. If I want to boost the size of the content inside that frame, I use the little slider down here, and then back to my little control hub there in the center. And eventually I get, hopefully, a more dramatic image with a little bit better sizing and scaling and placing. But I do have to remember not to just drag those corner handles. To resize the whole thing now, I have to use this little guy, this little outlying circle right down here. And if I pull that, I resize the entire piece without goofing up the crop. So that's a quick rundown of picture frame. It's also non-destructive at this point, and it's incredibly useful. And I suppose it also behooves us to note that I've been working in the Pixel Studio. If I switch over to the Layout Studio, notice that there are some actual frame-related tools in here as well, like the Picture Frame Rectangle tool and even the Picture Frame Ellipse tool. These do about what you would expect. If I make an ellipse or hold Shift and make a perfect circle, and then just simply evoke the import command or the place command again, Control-Shift-M, Command-Shift-M, pick an image, hit return. Then that image loads up in that pre-existing shape instead of having to be converted from an image layer like we did before. So it works both ways. I'll delete that. Since we're working on mostly pixel issues, I'll switch back to the Pixel Studio. Ergo, super important tool for anyone doing layouts. Even simple layouts, you're gonna need a picture frame. Last little point, notice we've got a picture frame icon there. If we start toggling this open, we dig down just a little bit, eventually we get back to an image layer, so our image is still there inside of our picture frame. That's how this works. Let's move on to pixel layers. One way to think about a pixel layer is as a container to catch pixels that you paint. Affinity is a full-blown painting and drawing program, and if you're painting with pixels, you can see I'm in the Pixel Studio at the moment, then this is a great way to do that. I'll switch to a brush tool, for example, B for brush, picked out a cool little brush and a cool color. And the assistant automatically makes a pixel layer to catch the painting that I started doing there. If I continue to paint, all those pixels are going to go into this layer. This is really useful. I could paint all day into here just like I could in any other major painting program, except I can do everything else that Affinity can do here too, and I can do it without even leaving this one document. Let's prove that point. If I tap V, you can see I've actually got a modular area here that Affinity understands as an item. In fact, if I really want to, I can right-click and say Convert to Image Resource. Image Resource just means let's change this back to an image, and you can see the icon here has changed to an image icon, and now it behaves like an image. But check it out, if I want, I can re-rasterize it back down to a pixel layer and keep painting into it all day. I could even change it up to a picture frame, which converts this to an image and pops it into a picture frame. So that, I don't know, maybe I need to crop it or resize it or something inside of a frame, whatever the needs of your layout might be. I have actually tested this pretty hard recently, and I converted the same image back and forth, I bet 25 times, and I did not lose any visual clarity as I did it. The image stayed nice and clean. So whatever is happening under the hood here with these different commands, Affinity is doing a nice job to maintain image quality. Pixel layers are pretty useful. Here's another important use for a pixel layer. So I've brought in just a normal image here, and you can see the icon shows this is an image layer. And I could still go in and do global changes with live filters or adjustment layers here like we did before. But what if I want to do something more specific instead, like remove a blemish from skin, or maybe take this extra head out of the picture, or change the red of the shirt, something specific like that. To do that, first, I'm going to select the picture and roll down to Rasterize, which just turns that image into a whole bunch of pixels at the resolution and the color space of the document, by the way. And it's now just pixel data instead of what Affinity thinks of as a photograph. And if we notice here, it's changed to the pixel layer type here. And for example, I could tap B, maybe get the in-painting brush, and just paint a ruby over the kite here. This is called a ruby lith back in the day. Paint that in, a little bit of calculation, and boom, totally destroyed the picture. What good's a kite photo without a kite? But you get the point. It allows me to do pixel-based work on an image rather than overall work like we would have done with these tools here. Now, raw files are about as close as we can get to taking pristine data right off a camera's sensor, without goofing up color, without compressing, and so on. So if you understand that workflow, Affinity has some really nice tools for dealing with raw files. Let's take a quick glance at that. To get started, just import one, Control-Shift-M or Command-Shift-M. I'll use this one. This one's an Adobe digital negative file. All these companies have their own proprietary RAW formats. You can see NEF for Nikon. You might have CR3s or CR2s for Canons. I'll use this one. Just hit open. The image will place and load the cursor. I'm going to place it on the screen in the canvas. And we get what is Affinity's best guess at what this image is supposed to look like. If it's a RAW file, it actually really doesn't look like anything yet if you dig into the image theory a little bit. But not going too far into that, the real opportunity here is that we can develop this heavily using the develop command up here. And in fact, depending on how you opened that image, you may have seen this automatically pop open to begin with. So we have some great opportunities here to interpret the raw data right off the sensor, or close to it anyway, right from the get-go. So for example, I might boost exposure gently. You can see we've switched to terminology that feels like camera work here. I might boost the clarity gently to get a little bit of sharpness on some of those edges. And I sometimes like to use shadows and highlights. I can see just a little bit of blown highlight there in that highlight area, so I'll pull that down gently. Not too hard, I don't want to damage anything too badly. Might open the shadows a little bit. Might counteract that with lowering the black point a little bit to crisp up the edges just a hair, and maybe just a touch of saturation, something like that. When I get it looking the way I like, I just hit develop, and Bob's your uncle. It applies those changes in a virtual way, not in a destructive way, but a non-destructive way. And notice it has maintained this file in the raw format over here. So Affinity is showing this to us dynamically without messing up the original file. This is really cool. Thanks for stopping by to spray these things down with de-tangler. And do let me know in the comments if you have related topics you want to dig into.
Well, cranky crawdads, I never knowed pictures could get that complicated.
Anyway, thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.